David Liggett with datacenterHawk, focused on cloud and colocation, data center industry trends, and dynamic market. I'm David Liggett with datacenterHawk, and I'm so excited to be joined with Jim Masterson. Jim is the CEO of LightEdge. Jim, good to be with you. Thanks so much for jumping on.
Thanks a lot, David. I appreciate the invitation.
Let's start with your background in the space. You know, one of my most exciting things to do is to get to have these conversations with industry leaders, and you certainly are one of those and have been at the helm at LightEdge for a while now. But talk to us just about your background and how you got into the data center industry.
Absolutely. To be honest, I found out early in my career. I started in the telecom industry, like a lot of folks did back in the day, at least from my age group, and I had a opportunity to kind of get involved with a startup company. It was a wholly owned subsidiary of a large telco. And I, from that experience, realized that I had a great deal of passion for high growth opportunities. So I had a string of high growth, mostly startup companies for several years, included anything from basic telecommunication services through free space optics, which was basically fiber optics through the air, lasers through the air. And then as fate would have it, I landed in Des Moines, Iowa at LightEdge, which at the time, which was about 17 years ago, which at the time was a networking company. And the plan all along was to take this company at the time called Lighthouse Communications, which was a business ISP, and the vision was to convert it into a cloud company. And the reason that I was attracted to this company sitting in Des Moines, Iowa, was because it had about 1,000 businesses hanging off of what was kind of a first generation MPLS network. And what we thought we could do, myself and a couple of people that were my confidants, we thought we could do was convert this company, leveraging their wide area network, and begin to deploy services inside of the network and offer those services as a managed hosted service. And that kind of led to the deployment of our first cloud services. But then that quickly led to, as that began to take off, we realized that for us to continue to be effective servicing the enterprise marketplace, that we were going to need better physical assets that we could host our cloud platforms in. So we began to build and ultimately own and operate our own data centers.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about the maturity of just the different businesses that you mentioned right there, and how starting to understand users and how the actual end user themselves has changed over time, and the needs have changed. It really seems like it created an opportunity for the LightEdge brand and the company. Talk about the portfolio. I mean, obviously you have a very rich background in the Midwest, and that's where the majority of your portfolio lies, although you've added some additional facilities and services with some acquisitions. But just talk about where the portfolio is today and where you have expanded to.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, once we deployed the first cloud platform, and we thought we better build a data center. There was no data centers. There was nothing like a colocation facility. There was no Facebook in Des Moines, Iowa. Yeah. There was no Google or Amazon. And so we partnered with a local construction company and a local design firm, and we built our first physical asset outside of Des Moines by about 15 minutes. And from there, as that facility began to fill up, and it did over the period of maybe 3 to 4 years, we decided we were going to expand into the Kansas City marketplace. So from there, we began exploring where we might build a data center in Kansas City, and we found our way on a crooked path. We found our way to the Hunt family, and the Hunt family owns the Subtropolis Technology Park within Kansas City. And what was kind of interesting about that was, we didn't know it at the time until we dug into it, but the Lamar Hunt family, who you're familiar with from Texas, the Lamar Hunt family had a long-standing relationship with my investor, who is Phil Anschutz. And Phil Anschutz and Lamar Hunt Sr. Were responsible for bringing MLS soccer to the United States. So at one point, I think Lamar Hunt owned like 2 of the MLS teams, and Phil Anschutz owned the other 6. And so they had a long-standing relationship that kind of made the discussions associated with how do we work together in Kansas City on a data center idea fairly straightforward because of that trust. So we began discussing that possibility with them, and ultimately LightEdge deployed our first, I think it was our first 30,000, 40,000 square feet in the Subtropolis with a massive commitment set aside by the Hunt people for LightEdge. I think upwards of these days, I think we're talking about 800,000 square feet that's been set aside for this. But so that's how we got into Kansas City. From Kansas City, we were looking at Omaha, because what we really liked was, to be honest with you, David, what we really liked was within those 3 marketplaces, you had a almost identical travel time between markets. You had about 2 to 3 hour travel time between markets. It made for a wonderful triangulation of a disaster recovery story. So we were looking at Omaha, and we had actually acquired about 25 acres to build a facility there in Omaha, outside of Omaha. And we came across at the same time that Cabela's was selling their data center, the Bass Pro, in that acquisition. So it is a first-class data center. It's a purpose-built facility. So we decided, you know what, it'll satisfy our needs. We bought the Cabela's data center. They stayed on as an anchor tenant, and that's how we got into Omaha. From there, we just began to execute on the strategy associated with that triangulation. And then an opportunity was presented to us, which was this Texas company, OnRamp. And we weren't looking at the time, but what we liked about it was they had a very similar go-to-market strategy as LightEdge did. It was the combination of colocation and cloud. And it was also a combination of regulatory and compliance type of thought process associated with the facilities and the platform. So the other thing it gave us was, as part of that, was scale. It gave LightEdge a whole other level of scale when we put those 2 organizations together. And so that, plus, to be honest with you, someday it may actually pay dividends. Today it doesn't get a lot of attention, but we kind of like the idea that it was a third power grid. So the fact that Texas has their own power grid was another side benefit of that. And then, frankly, it was still within, a decent amount of distance from a flight standpoint. So that, to be honest with you, what we're seeing right now is as much business from a DR standpoint or secondary site standpoint coming from Texas to the Midwest, and now the Midwest to Texas. So it actually, has worked out pretty nice.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for those that don't know, I wanted to go back to your Kansas City comment about the Subtropolis. Describe that environment. It's a very unique environment. There might be people that don't know exactly what that environment's like, but just talk about that for a quick second.
Absolutely, it's really cool. I to this day, when I go into that, it's a limestone mine. That area in that Kansas, Missouri area has a cave system up there that are all sorts of different limestone caves. This is that idea, but on steroids. It was a Hunt family asset that they mined for years, and it is the equivalent of 30 Arrowhead stadiums. So when you drive into this mine, it's like going into the Batcave. I mean, it's just truly amazing to this day, because there's literally city streets with street names. There's lights. There is about 1,500 businesses that are operating down in the Subtropolis. Anything from now data centers with LightEdge, but all the way to the Ford manufacturing plant is down there. So it's truly like a city underground. Now, in addition to what we liked about it was there is a natural discussion associated with additional security having that kind of a facility, because someday we all hope it doesn't happen, but if someday there was going to be an upheaval in the world and people talk about electromagnetic pulses and EMP, this is a 165-foot cap below surface, which gives you quite a bit of comfort that if your physical assets reside that deep underground, you're almost immune to the kinds of things that could occur in the area of what might happen above ground. The other thing is it's a natural aspirating mine. And what that means is that it has multiple egress and ingress in and out of that mine that gives that a natural aspiration from an air standpoint. And ultimately, once we stabilized the physical data center colocation asset in that mine, the temperature begins to settle in. And once the temperature begins to settle in, you get benefits of a very limited fluctuation in temperatures from winter to hot summers. So it's not perfect, but it's significantly beneficial when you're talking about the management of cooling, if you will.
Yeah.
So that's what it looks like. And from a LightEdge standpoint, the level of security under there, not only do you have to get into the mine, which they have in Kansas City, they are qualified within that mine. They have their own police department, if you will. So there's literally guys driving around down there on golf carts that are armed. So you start with that together with LightEdge's physical security systems around that facility. You're talking about something pretty darn robust.
Yeah, it's really unique. I think I was there, several years ago, and just reminded of, as you mentioned, it is a very mature system, and you really have to see it to understand it, because it's truly, something different. I like how you mentioned just the importance of data center user needs and the physical security. And you have, as you've had your experience with LightEdge, you've seen those needs ebb and flow over time and those change. You've mentioned this, the idea of colocation and cloud services, and those mixed together almost now. Talk about that, because you all came into the business, as you mentioned, from the telecom side of things. You sold additional services to customers, and now you really have this offering that allows them to be flexible with the services that you offer. Talk about how important that is today for data center users.
It's a great question, and it's a question right now that I'm so thrilled to be on the right side of the answer to that question. Because in our industry, the way that I describe it from our perspective in this industry is that our DNA started from a networking standpoint. From there, it migrated into a cloud DNA, and from there, it migrated into a real estate DNA. The people and some of the organizations that we compete with started on the opposite end of that spectrum.
Sure.
They started with real estate, and they try to figure out cloud, and then they're going to have to figure out network. I would much rather be going from the network and cloud to the real estate than the opposite direction.
Sure.
So from our perspective, we're in a pretty good spot. Our go-to-market has always included the philosophy of we wanted to present clients with a continuum of choices. So you could determine to simply make a decision to get out of your own four walls and move your physical assets out of your own four walls because they're outdated, because of the changes in technology, the heat that you have to deal with now with some of these technologies. And you could move it into a co-location center like LightEdge's, which is, quality tier 3. It's got all the bells and whistles associated with security. And today it's all, highly oriented towards the regulatory environment with the certifications. So you could just choose to do that. Or if you're an organization that wanted to leap all the way to the end of that decision and start with a fully outsourced enterprise class cloud platform running your legacy systems, and we fully manage it and take care of it for you, that was the balance that we gave, the continuum we gave customers. Now, today what they're deciding, which is then you kind of get to the fact why the network now, that DNA comes back to be a big deal from our perspective, is that a lot of customers probably, I would tell you that the majority of the businesses that we're talking to now are making choices either with just the physical asset, the co-location aspect of it, the real estate side, or the cloud. But once they make one of those decisions, they're usually adding the second decision to that tree, that logic tree. So in most cases, and there's several that come to mind, they first, let's move out of our own four walls. Once they get there, the very next thing is, especially with things that are going on right now in the world of pandemic and all the rest of this, they immediately go to, well, how do we further protect our data with a secondary location? And in many cases, we're talking about tertiary location. So how do we do that? Well, in many cases, they don't want, and even the biggest ones don't want to necessarily build out a second physical location inside of one of our data centers. and then have to manage it between those two facilities from a disaster recovery standpoint. So they go to LightEdge and they say, we'll take down square footage in Des Moines, Iowa, and we want a secondary site that you manage for us that we can replicate to, or we can create active environments that is not a physical asset that we own, but you own the cloud. So we see a lot of Des Moines to Omaha, Omaha to Kansas City, today, as I mentioned, Midwest to Texas, that are just basically buying both types of services.
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. The wide range of portfolio, different geographic locations, huge value for those, companies that need those type of services. Obviously, I think one of the biggest challenges for the data center end user today, and we talk about it here a lot, is you have to make, decisions today around bets around the future. And, the future obviously is always changing. We've seen some changes this year that we've never seen before in our world. And then you layer on a company acquiring another company, or a company realizing that it does not make sense to have owned assets they want to transition out of X, Y, or Z. And so I think companies that are able to really help an end user on that journey is extremely valuable, and it seems like you all have really been able to do that.
Well, that's exactly right, David. And then add the network to it, and people, the difference in perspectives of when they talk about network, the difference in perspectives spans the breadth of distances with regards to what does that mean. A lot of data centers today, especially single site data centers, you locate yourself in the data center and you figure out via whatever carriers are available in that data center how you might reach the internet. Or if you need to get from that data center to your headquarters site, you, the client, still has to figure that out and then manage it yourself. The way that LightEdge does this, and it really is, we believe, a fairly unique differentiator in the marketplace. We have always had the strategy of tying together our co-location centers, not only through the carrier hotels in each marketplace, but we build out our own backbone, our own fiber backbone, connecting all of our facilities together that we fully manage, that come with all of our service offerings. So it's not a new line item. You get it when you purchase something from LightEdge and you buy a second site. You leverage our backbone as part of the service. And it is a very elegant end-to-end type of solution when you purchase more than one site or more than one service in a geographical dispersed area from a LightEdge standpoint. So for us, that's when we talk network, it's fully managed backbone type stuff. Now, obviously we're a carrier neutral facility, so we have multiple internet drains in all of our facilities, as many as anybody would. But that fully managed backbone for us, what it translates to is our ability to sit there with a client and say, look, we have not only one way in and out of the marketplace through the carrier hotel, but we typically have three. So we like to triangulate our way in and out of a marketplace from a disaster recovery standpoint.
Yeah, and it seems like LightEdge has invested significantly on the compliance side of things and making sure that you really have a strong offering to a number of different types of companies that would find that they have to meet certain levels of compliance to operate their environments in a way that's suitable for their business. Talk about why that's become so much more important today than it was, years ago.
Yeah, it's still to this day one of these very complicated situations for clients, because that I won't even do justice to the explanation of this, but when these organizations decide that in today's environment that they're going to provide a service to their client, let's take the healthcare market or the financial marketplace, the level of scrutiny on these organizations from a regulatory standpoint is it's incredible. And it's almost impossible for them to fully manage a compliant regulatory environment on their own. So LightEdge, over the last, I think we launched our compliancy strategy, I think 7 years ago. And we've slowly over 7 years been building upon that. So for us and for our clients, what they like to do then from the physical layer, the physical infrastructure layer and down, if you think in terms of an OSI model or just a stack model in this business, LightEdge will outsource all of the regulatory certifications that those customers require to satisfy the most stringent requirements of their particular industry. So, Yes, we have a chief security officer on staff. We provide him as part of our, again, as part of our service offering. You can leverage him. He builds out for us with the customer. He builds out the complete certification regulatory requirement certification that particular business might need. We build out that solution for them, hand them the binder with all of the different boxes checked, all of the different certifications provided, and it's a truly elegant solution for those customers that then only have to worry about the highest level of order when it comes to the data itself. So we basically take all the plumbing, provide all the regulatory certifications around it. Customer focuses on their data specifically.
That's good. And talk about how the pandemic has impacted, LightEdge, and how you all have been able to work through some of maybe the challenges that have risen with that. And then what do you think, the next year looks like as companies begin to hopefully come back to the office and begin, maybe getting back to a more normal state of things?
I think the first thing we saw instantly, as you can imagine, was obviously people had to work from home. And then it was really nice for clients that had their systems deployed within one of our facilities, because what we saw was massive need for internet. So, as long as the remote worker could get to the internet, if your data and your platform was located within a LightEdge facility, you had more than enough internet to provide your workers backbone access to phenomenal bandwidth. So the first thing we saw was a huge spike in bandwidth at our data centers, which was great. And the second thing we've seen, though, is I think the ultimate ramification of this is, again, at the board level and at the C level of these organizations, they're obviously going to continue and now accelerate in asking the question, which is, we didn't plan for a pandemic. Here we are. Were we prepared? If we weren't prepared, how do we know what the next problem is going to be? And are we prepared to be able to handle all of this ourselves? So I think what it does, and we haven't seen any slowdown in our business, it's actually increased. I think it's because boards and C-suites are saying we want to reduce the risk that we have as an organization. And you have to pick partners that can help you do that. But today's next generation ecosystem associated with IT is so much more complicated, and the requirements for keeping your business up and running have only increased and actually gone through the roof, that anybody that's in a thoughtful executive or advisor has to be asking the questions, how could we possibly keep up with all of this ourselves? So in my mind, I think the pandemic is going to accelerate the adoption curve for the kinds of services and products that a company like LightEdge offers.
Well, Jim, thanks so much for taking time to connect. I'm really excited to get to see what LightEdge does down the road, and we'll look forward to watching your success happen.
David, thank you very much. It was great talking to you.